The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not snow, not diesel, not the usual sour coffee smell that lived in every long-haul cab from Fairbanks to Deadhorse. It was overheated brake pads, sharp and bitter, the kind of smell you got after a bad descent when metal had been worked too hard and stayed angry about it. I hadn't touched the brakes in miles. Then the radio hiss changed. Most nights the CB rode under everything else, a blanket of static and far-off chatter and weather noise. That night it thinned out all at once, like someone had put their mouth right against the speaker. I heard one dry breath. Then a voice I hadn't heard in 10 years used the exact call sign Miles Avery used on me back when we ran team together. "Curtis, you left me at mile marker 214. I've been driving ever since." My hands locked on the wheel, and the cab heater clicked. The windshield gave a little rattle in the cold. Outside, the Dalton was black ice and drifting powder and nothing else. I checked the CB power switch with my thumb. It was on. I turned it off. The voice kept talking through a dead radio. I looked in the mirror and saw headlights behind me, too far back to show a grille, too bright to belong on that stretch, holding my speed exactly. When I eased down, they eased down. When I brought it back up, they came with me, never gaining, never falling away. Then Miles said, very calm, like we'd only been off the road a week, "Pull over this time." I still don't know what scared me more, hearing his voice or recognizing the patience in it. Because patience meant he'd been waiting. And if he'd been waiting all that time, what exactly had been driving behind me? And I need to go back to the beginning. Leona May Kincaid called me just after dusk, while I was finishing a paper cup of burnt coffee in Fairbanks and pretending I might turn the run down. That was theater more than anything. I needed the money. I always needed the money in winter. Halls thinned out, costs climbed, and there were only so many ways a man with my reputation could make a living once people decided he worked better alone than with company. Dispatchers never said it plain, but they knew. Drivers knew too. I was the one who could take the ugly hours, the ugly weather, the loads nobody wanted because I didn't have a wife waiting up, didn't have kids needing weekends, didn't have anybody asking why I looked half over my shoulder, even in a diner booth. Leona knew better than to waste time on small talk. "Are you still legal to drive?" "Depends who you're asking." "I'm asking." "Then yes." I heard papers shifting, keys tapping, the low murmur of 3 other voices in the dispatch office. Leona always sounded like she sat in the middle of a storm and had no plans to move. Her voice was rough with cigarettes and night shifts and years of hearing men panic for practical reasons. "I've got a late haul up to Deadhorse. Equipment crates sealed. Pickups ready. Trucks at the yard. You're in cab 12. I watched steam from the coffee ghost out of the cup and disappear. Cab 12 was Halverson's. It was. The way she said it made me straighten up. Was? A pause. Not long, but long enough. Russell Dean Halverson missed check-in on his last southbound. Truck turned up. He didn't. Paperwork's clean enough that I can put the unit back in rotation, so I'm putting it back in rotation. That should have been the part that bothered me. It didn't. Missing drivers happened up there more than anybody liked to say out loud. Weather swallowed people. Machines swallowed people. Pride swallowed people faster than either. If you stayed on the Dalton long enough, you learned not to ask too many questions unless you were ready to hear answers that would sit in your chest for years. Leona went on. Normal protocol still applies. Don't respond to any voice on the CB unless you can confirm the driver's identity and route. If a vehicle follows you for more than 10 miles without passing, report it and maintain speed. Don't stop on unmarked stretches after dark. She always sounded clipped when she did company rules. It like reading dosage instructions. That night, she slowed down on the last thing she said. Then she added, And if you get any unconfirmed transmissions, I want them logged by mile marker. The dry cold outside bit at the inside of my nose when I stepped out of the diner. Even that short walk to the yard felt like breathing splinters. My boots squeaked over packed snow. Somewhere behind the service bay, a compressor coughed itself awake. "Unconfirmed how?" I asked. More paper sounds. Then lower. Voices where there shouldn't be any. Roots that don't match. Dead air that answers back. I waited for her to laugh. She didn't. "That's company language now?" "That's my language now, Curtis." That was the first moment I should have backed out. Looking back, that was the moment the road offered me one clean exit. I took the keys. Cab 12 smelled wrong before I even climbed in. Most trucks settle into a blend of stale heat, old grease, wool gloves left damp too long, maybe pine air freshener if the driver's the sentimental type. This one carried that same hot brake smell from the cold, open, bitter and metallic, like something had been forced to stop and never finished cooling off. The cab was neat. Too neat. Russell had wiped down the dash. The thermos holder was empty. Log sheets squared. Roots clipped. And taped to the center console with a strip of silver duct tape was a folded piece of yellow paper. Not company stationery. Not a maintenance note. Just a torn sheet from a legal pad with handwriting pressed in hard enough to leave grooves. I almost threw it away without opening it. Instead, I peeled it off and unfolded it under the dome light. And the writing was blocky, all capital letters, like Russell had been trying to make sure nobody mistook anything. "If you hear someone you know on the radio who shouldn't be alive, answer them once so they don't come closer. If the truck behind you matches your speed exactly, slow down until it passes or you're already too late. Stopping is the only way to prove it isn't you." I remember snorting at that. Not because it was funny, because contempt is easier than fear when you're alone in a parked truck and something written by a stranger manages to hit one of your old bruises dead center. Someone you know on the radio who shouldn't be alive. I folded the paper and slipped it into my jacket pocket anyway. Then I called Leona back on the yard line and said, "You forgot to mention Halverson left me bedtime reading." Her exhale filled the line. "He'd throw it out. You know what's on it?" "I know Russell got ideas in his head." "Funny thing about ideas," I said, "sometimes they start somewhere." Her voice went flatter. "Company rules are the only rules you've got, you understand me?" "I hear you." "That's not what I asked." The heater in the cab clicked on under my knees. Somewhere in the truck's frame, metal gave a tired ticking sound as the cold settled deeper. "Yeah," I said at last. "I understand." But I kept the note. That was the last ordinary lie I told that night. By the time I crossed out of Fairbanks proper and settled into the long black run north, the world had narrowed to engine vibration, headlight reach, and the white blur of snow lifting off the shoulder. The Dalton wasn't a scenic route in winter. It was a system of decisions: throttle, distance, mirror, wind, ice, and a marker. Every mile had its own habits. I knew where the crosswinds slapped broadside. I knew where the drifts packed harder on the right shoulder. I knew where the road dipped and held shadow like a bruise. And I knew, without looking at any map, exactly how far it was to mile marker 214. I told myself that was only habit. I told myself a lot of things then. Around mile marker 180, the radio started sounding like somebody breathing through cloth. At first it was easy to ignore. Static on the Dalton could do strange things. Bounce off weather, skip off terrain, catch half a sentence from 100 miles wrong and lay it over your own dash like a ghost. Anybody who drove up there long enough heard things that didn't belong. You filed them under fatigue and kept going. So I did, and I adjusted the heat down a notch. Took a swallow of coffee that had already gone lukewarm. Checked mirrors. Empty road ahead, empty road behind. Snow lightning in the beams. Nothing more. Then the breathing resolved into a laugh. Not a big laugh. Just one short burst through the speaker, exactly the way Miles used to laugh when he was trying not to spit dip into a bottle and missed the timing. I didn't move. My right hand stayed on the wheel. My left rested near the radio, not touching it. "Kurt," the voice said, easy as anything, "you still drinking coffee that tastes like somebody rinsed a battery in it?" There are things grief does to memory. It sands them down, smudges edges, takes a man's face and leaves you with the shape of him instead. That's what I'd always told myself about Miles, and that 10 years was enough to wear the specifics away. It wasn't. That line was his, exact. He'd used it outside Coldfoot once after we got served coffee so strong it smelled like hot wire insulation. He'd grinned into the steam and said it almost word for word, then spent the next 30 miles pretending the cup was alive and trying to climb out of the holder. It wasn't the kind of joke anybody else would have remembered. It wasn't in a report. It wasn't something I ever repeated. The speaker hissed softly. I kept my voice inside my teeth and reached over to turn the CB volume down to nothing. The laugh came again just as clear. I checked the power switch, still on. I switched it off. Static filled the cab anyway. That was the first time the cold felt like it had gotten inside the truck. My nose burned with it, and the skin on the back of my hands tightened. I could hear every small sound, the fan motor, the rattle in the passenger side visor, the faint tick of ice pellets catching the undercarriage. "Curtis," Miles said, gentler now. "Don't do that. I know when you're still listening. I should tell you something here. I didn't scare easy on the road. Startle, sure. Respect bad conditions always. But fear, real fear, the kind that changes how a man thinks, usually had to earn its way in. I'd driven through ice fog so thick I had to watch the marker posts crawl by just to know I was still on pavement. I'd chained up in a crosswind strong enough to move my shoulders. I'd seen a tanker burn blue in the distance and still kept my truck straight because there was nothing else to do. That voice got in faster than weather ever did. I didn't answer. In company rule. Confirm identity and route first or don't engage. Instead, I grabbed the handset for the SAT unit and called dispatch. Leona picked up on the second ring. "Go." "Unconfirmed transmission," I said. I hated how dry my mouth sounded. "At mile marker 180, give or take a few." "What kind of transmission?" The static swelled over the dead CB speaker as if it were listening too. "Male voice. Recognize it?" I looked at the black face of the powered-off radio. "I think I do." Her silence sharpened. "Can you verify route?" "No." "Then don't respond," the voice in the cab said at the same time. "That's what you did last time." I nearly dropped the SAT handset. "What's happening?" Leona asked. I forced air in through my nose. The cold stabbed. "Nothing. Static bleed." "Maintain speed," she said. "Do not stop. You log every contact and every mile marker. If you get visual confirmation on any trailing vehicle, call it in." The word trailing made me check the mirror even though I knew there was nothing there. Still nothing. "Copy," I said. "Say it like you mean it." I said copy. She hung up. The radio hiss stayed. For the next 10 miles, the voice didn't try to frighten me. That's the part I still think about. If it had screamed, if it had threatened me, if it had done anything theatrical, I might have found a way to file it under stress. But it sounded patient, familiar, hurt maybe, but in the quiet way that made you lean in instead of recoil. It asked whether I still kept the passenger heat vent half shut because full blast dried my eyes out. It asked whether I still cracked the driver window a finger width when I got tired, even in winter, because the cold air kept me honest. It asked if I still carried that same cheap silver lighter even though I hadn't smoked in years. Every answer was no answer. I gave it nothing. My jaw hurt from clenching. Then it said very softly, "I kept waiting for you to come back." That sentence sat between the seats like another person. I reached down and yanked the CB power lead from the socket. The speaker went dark. The static didn't. It went right on hissing from somewhere under the dash, thin and steady, as if the truck itself had learned how to imitate a radio. That was when I looked in the side mirror and saw headlights appear behind me, not rising over a hill, not turning in from a spur. Just there, already set at distance, riding my lane. I checked the clock, checked the marker, checked the mirror again, and the lights held perfectly still in relation to me, bright enough to show in the glass but too clean to throw detail. No sway, no gain, no pass attempt. 10 miles, company rule said. If a vehicle follows you for more than 10 miles without passing, report it and maintain speed. I told myself I still trusted rules because rules had kept me alive all those years. The truth was uglier than that. I trusted rules because if rules failed, then choices were all that remained. And I already knew what kind of man I was when a choice cost somebody else more than it cost me. I watched those lights for 10 miles exactly. At 10, I called Leona. "You've got a tail," she said before I finished. "How do you know that?" "Because you're not the first tonight." The road noise filled the gap between us. My gloves creaked against the wheel, and the heater blew dry air that smelled faintly of old dust and something hot underneath it. "I can't get details," I said. "Just lights. They match everything I do. Do not brake hard. Do not invite a pass. Hold your lane." "So it is something." Another pause. Then, "It's a vehicle behind you." "Leona, if it wanted to pass, it would have passed." That should have helped. It didn't. The voice on the dead CB said, amused, "Ask her what happened to Russell." I swallowed hard enough to feel it. Leona heard it. "Curtis, are you alone in that cab?" "Yeah." "Then keep it that way." After that, the lights stayed with me. When I nudged left to avoid a glazed patch, they nudged left. When I eased back center, so did they. When I let the truck bleed off 2 miles an hour on a shallow grade, they bled off with me, perfect as a reflection. A reflection was exactly what it felt like. Not another driver making decisions, but my own decisions being handed back to me from behind. Then the voice on the dead radio changed tone. Not angry, just impatient. "You ignored me then too," Miles said. "Why are you doing it again?" It should have been impossible for one word to do what that one did. Again. Not left me, not abandoned me. Again. As if that night 10 years ago and this one belonged to the same ongoing conversation. As if I wasn't hearing a memory. As if I'd only paused between answers. The road bent through a low stretch where snow had drifted thin across the asphalt and polished it silver. I kept both hands on the wheel and thought about Russell's note in my pocket. "Answer them once so they don't come closer. If the truck behind you matches your speed exactly, you slow down until it passes or you're already too late. Stopping is the only way to prove it isn't you." Those were not the words of a man having a rough week. They were the words of somebody trying to hand off a map before the dark reached him. I still didn't believe him, but I started reading his note from memory anyway, line by line like a prayer from a religion I didn't trust. A little after 1 in the morning, I saw the fuel stop. That shouldn't mean much if you've never worked the interior. To most people, a lighted structure on a dark road is just a building. Up there at that hour on that run, it meant one of two things. Either luck had turned sentimental all at once, or something was wrong enough to wear the shape of luck. The canopy lights buzzed a sick yellow in the snow. One pump island stood lit. Office windows glowed. Here there was a plow parked crooked by the side berm with frost-feathered white over the windshield. I knew that stop. It wasn't supposed to be open after midnight in winter, not unless a maintenance crew had arranged fuel ahead. My first thought was relief so sharp it felt embarrassing. My second was that the hot brake smell had gotten stronger. I called Leona. No answer. I called again. Straight to static. The headlights behind me stayed in the mirror. Same distance, same perfect obedience. Russell's second rule came back to me. If the truck behind you matches your speed exactly, slow down until it passes or you're already too late. Company rule said maintain speed. I took the off-ramp to the stop instead. Even now, I don't know whether that was me breaking protocol or me following the oldest instinct drivers have, which is this. Even if you can get near another human being, get near another human being. The tires crunched over hard-packed snow. The truck settled with a hiss of air. For 1 second, with the engine idling and the canopy light washing the hood pale, I almost convinced myself I'd stepped back into the ordinary world. Then I looked in the mirror. The headlights on the main road had stopped too. They hadn't followed me into the lot. They just waited at the shoulder, pointed in my direction like eyes. The cold hit like broken glass when I climbed down. It sliced the inside of my nose raw and made my lungs feel too small on the first breath. My boots hit the frozen ground with a hollow sound. Somewhere a loose metal sign tapped lightly in the wind. The office door opened before I reached it. Russell Halverson stood there in a reflective jacket and a gray knit cap, one hand still on the handle like he'd been expecting me. He was younger than I'd pictured from the handwriting, maybe late 30s, broad through the chest, beard gone uneven with road neglect. His face had that overused look drivers get in winter, skin chapped dark at the cheekbones, eyes bloodshot but far too awake. He smelled like cold fabric, diesel fumes, and stale mint gum. "You took longer than I thought," he said. He didn't ask my name. I stopped 3 paces short of the door. "You're Russell." He glanced past me toward the road. "And you're the man in my truck. Your truck was reassigned." His mouth twitched once, not a smile. "That what she told you?" The office behind him looked real. Coffee maker on, logbooks, a wall calendar curled at the corners, a space heater ticking by the counter. I could hear country music low from a radio somewhere in the back, one of those old songs that sound like they're apologizing for something. I said, "Dispatch told me you missed check-in." "I did. You don't look missing. Neither do you." There was no way to answer that without giving him ground, so I didn't. I stepped inside far enough to get out of the wind, but kept my gloves on. The heat smelled dusty. Strong coffee sat burnt on the warmer. Beside the register was a stack of handwritten forms weighted by a lug nut. On the counter, half under an oil-stained clipboard, I saw the same block handwriting from the note in my pocket. Russell followed my eyes and said, "You read it." I read enough. And I think you scared yourself into writing fan fiction." He studied me for a second too long. Has it talked to you yet?" The space heater gave a metallic ping. My throat had gone dry again. "Unconfirmed transmission," I said, using Leona's language because it felt safer. He shook his head once. "That's not what I asked." I heard my own impatience then, defensive and ugly. "You want me to say it used a dead man's voice so you can feel smart?" "No." He leaned a hip against the counter. "I want to know whether it sounded like somebody you'd follow." That landed closer than I wanted. I looked toward the window instead. The waiting headlights were still out there on the road, fixed and white. Russell saw where I was looking. "Even you haven't answered it yet." "Company says don't." "Company says a lot of things that make it sound like they've got this figured out." "I trust official better than whatever this is." "Then why are you here?" "Because I was tired of being alone with that voice. Because the sound of Miles saying my name through a dead speaker had opened something in me I'd spent 10 years packing down hard. Because I wanted another person in the room badly enough that I was willing to stand next to a stranger who'd left warnings in a truck like ransom notes. I didn't say any of that. Russell did something worse. He looked directly at the empty space over my right shoulder, the passenger side, and said, "You always run solo?" "Mostly." "By choice?" I let that hang. He rubbed at the beard on his jaw. "Mine started with a woman I used to drive ore with, and that's why I wrote the note. Nobody tells the whole truth about this road. They tell the piece that might keep you moving long enough not to blame them after." There it was, the first crack in trust. Leona with company rules, Russell with his desperate little scripture. Both speaking like survival belonged to whoever controlled the story. I said, "You think answering helps?" "I think not answering lets it stay curious. Your note says if the truck behind me matches my speed, I slow down until it passes. It usually won't pass, that's not the point." "Then what is?" His eyes shifted to mine and stayed there. "You need to know whether it's following you or rehearsing you." The cold from outside had followed me into the room somehow. I could feel it under my collar. Before I could ask what that meant, Russell said very quietly, "Did you leave him or did you get replaced?" My hands went numb inside the gloves. For a second, I genuinely couldn't hear the space heater or the song on the radio or the wind outside. There was just that question sitting in the air between us like it had always belonged there. "Who told you that name?" I said. "I didn't use one." "You knew enough. I know how it talks." He straightened off the counter. "It gets intimate before it gets dangerous. That's how it learns the fit." I took one step back toward the door. He didn't stop me, didn't reach. That somehow made him harder to read. "Answer at once," he said. "Then keep driving. If you don't, it'll keep narrowing the distance until the version of you behind the wheel makes more sense to it than the one you think you are." That sounded insane, and it also sounded more considered than the company line. I hated that. "I'll stick with the official rules," I said. Russell nodded like he'd expected that from the start. People usually do the first time. I put my hand on the door handle. He added, "If it starts using your voice, you're out of time." That should have made me stay. It made me leave. I crossed the lot with the cold cutting through my coat and climbed back into the truck. When I looked toward the office again, Russell was standing in the doorway, one hand braced on the frame, not waving, not calling after me, just watching. That was the last normal conversation I had with a living man that night. Once I merged back onto the Dalton, the headlights behind me slid into place as if they'd never been interrupted. The first thing I did was test them. Nothing reckless. Just enough to prove to myself there was a driver back there and not some optical trick. I eased down 2 miles an hour. The lights eased down. I drifted a tire width right inside the lane. The lights shifted with me. I brought my speed up again. Same answer. Mirror driving. That's what I started calling it in my head because the true description was worse. It wasn't pursuing me. It was agreeing with me. The radio hiss returned the second my tires straightened out. Not from the unplugged CB now. From everywhere. The dash, the vents, the seams around the windshield, a dry electrical whisper under the engine noise. Then Miles spoke again. "I told you to pull over." I kept both eyes on the road. "You're not Miles." My own voice sounded foreign in the cab. Small almost. The answer came instantly. "No, but you wanted him." And so I started there. Every muscle in my back locked. I hadn't meant to answer. It had come out on instinct, same as flinching. I reached toward the dead CB like I could take the words back by touching the wrong machine. The speaker crackled. Then I heard myself say from the radio in my own exact voice, "Answer him once." That's what the note said. I hadn't spoken those words. Not aloud. Not ever. The truck wandered half a foot before I corrected it. There's a special kind of fear that comes from hearing your own voice used against you. It's not like hearing a recording. A recording still belongs to a past version of you. This was live, immediate. My cadence, my roughness, the little dip on the last word when I was trying to sound calmer than I felt. It didn't sound copied. It sounded stolen. Miles came back over it, warm and familiar. And he's slow to admit things. Then my voice again. He was slow that night, too. The smell of hot brake pads thickened until it seemed impossible. I hadn't been braking enough to justify it. It got in the back of my throat, bitter and metallic, like I'd bitten my tongue on copper. I called Leona again. Static. Called once more. Static that almost formed words and didn't. Up ahead, the road unspooled in the high beams, dark pavement veined with blown snow. I knew every bend in that stretch. Knew which culvert dipped wind across the lane. Which rise would show you 10 miles clear and which one lied. Familiarity should have helped. Instead, it made the wrongness more exact. At mile marker 193, I passed a sign I remembered having fresh reflective tape last season. The tape was still there. The post still leaned a little east, and the drift at its base stood exactly as it ought to. Then in the mirror, I watched the following headlights pass over what should have been the same sign, and for an instant I saw not light but shape, my own truck's shape, the same company box, the same auxiliary lamps on the roof, the same slight vibration in the left headlight beam I always meant to get looked at. I checked my mirrors twice more and told myself it was reflection. But reflection from what? The road stayed empty in front of me, empty and black and perfectly willing to let me keep lying to myself. I thought of Russell in that lit doorway, of Leona's flat refusal to give anything a real name, of how both of them had tried to help me by controlling which part of the danger I was allowed to understand. Trust was getting eaten away by the mile, and not because anybody had proven false exactly. Because each of them seemed to be telling the truth only in slices, and slices aren't enough when a thing behind you is learning how you move. At mile marker 197, my voice came over the dead radio again. Slow down. I didn't. Slow down until it passes. I gripped the wheel harder. Then Miles, almost laughing, "See, this is why I never let you navigate." That one hurt in a different way. It wasn't from the night I left him. It was from before. Summer Hall, years earlier, both of us younger, him teasing me after I'd had us take the wrong turn into a maintenance spur and waste 40 minutes backing out. That memory was clean, untouched by guilt, the kind you don't guard because you assume nobody else could ever get to it. The thing on the radio had it anyway, and that's when I started wondering whether it was copying us or replaying us, whether it was building something new from whatever it could pull out of me or simply walking along grooves already carved somewhere in the world. Neither answer made me feel safer. One meant intelligence. The other meant there had been more of this before me than anyone admitted. I reached into my pocket and unfolded Russell's note one-handed at a straightaway, keeping my eyes mostly on the road. The paper crackled in the cabin heat. If you hear someone you know on the radio who shouldn't be alive, answer them once so they don't come closer. My mirror said the lights were no closer than before. If the truck behind you matches your speed exactly, slow down until it passes or you're already too late. Mirror said matched. You stopping is the only way to prove it isn't you. That line sat there like a hook. Maybe Russell had lost his mind. Maybe Leona was managing hysteria the way companies always do, by reducing it to procedure and hoping procedure outlives panic. Maybe both of them were wrong in different directions. The problem with contradictory rules is that they force a betrayal. Follow one, you reject the other. And if both are built from somebody else's survival, then choosing either feels like gambling with debt you didn't incur. The radio hiss pressed against my ears, then Miles said, "Tired now." "You always make me wait till it gets bad," I answered. Not because I believed Russell, not because I trusted the voice. I answered because hearing Miles sound disappointed in me in that exact old way cracked something open, and for one stupid second I wanted the pressure to stop more than I wanted to be right. "What do you want?" I asked. The road seemed to hold its breath. The response came immediate and soft. "Thank you." The headlights behind me surged forward, not wildly, not with a lunge. Just a smooth, impossible gain, as if distance had only been courtesy and courtesy was over. I swore and hit the sat handset again. "Leona, pick up! Pick up!" Static. The lights grew larger in the mirror, still centered, still exact, now close enough that I could see grill bars and the square bulk above them. My own truck. No missing it now. Same paint, same salt grime, same cracked corner on the front bumper where I'd clipped a bollard in Prudhoe Bay 2 winters back and never filed the paperwork because the damage was cosmetic and money was tighter than pride. And my own truck was behind me, gaining. The radio gave me my own voice once more, only this time it sounded relieved. "There you are." By then I understood the first real thing I was going to understand all night. Russell's rule had worked and failed at the same time. Answer them once so they don't come closer had not been false. It had been incomplete. The voice had wanted acknowledgement. Maybe without it, it had to stay outside a boundary. But once it got what it needed, it had permission to narrow the distance another way. Leona's rule had worked and failed too. Don't respond had kept it from gaining. But the longer I refused, the more it learned the shape of my silence. Both rule sets were survival advice from people who'd only seen one side of the trap. That realization felt like betrayal, but not because either of them had lied, or because both had handed me pieces and called them enough. I cut left inside my lane to dodge a drift ridge. The truck behind cut left in perfect answer. I tested brakes lightly. It matched. I rolled the window down a crack out of habit, desperate for cold air. The night poured in sharp as broken stone, burning my nose, and under it came that same hot brake smell, stronger than ever, riding the air like another presence tucked just beneath the cab. Then the voice behind me, my voice now more than Miles's, said, "Go back to the stop." I don't know why I listened. Maybe because Russell was the only person who'd looked at me like he knew the question under the question. Maybe because a lit room with another body in it still felt like a defense, even after everything. Maybe because if somebody had built rules from surviving this thing longer than me, I needed every scrap he'd left. I took the off-ramp again. This time the lot was dark. No canopy lights, no office glow, no plow by the berm. Just one dead building crouched under frost with snow drifted halfway up the pump islands. My headlights washed over a closed sign hanging crooked by one chain. I braked hard enough to smell the pads for real. For a moment I just sat there with the engine idling, staring through the windshield at a place I'd been standing in less than an hour earlier, warm and occupied and humming with low country music. The radio hiss never stopped. I took the flashlight from the door pocket and got out. The cold made my eyes water. Snow squealed dry beneath my boots. The building windows were black, but when I angled the beam through the glass, I saw an office exactly like the one before. Same counter, same heater, same calendar curled at the corners. Only now the coffee maker was empty and dusty, the radio gone, and the lug nut still sat on the counter like it had been there for months. The door wasn't locked. Inside, the air smelled shut in, old paper and stale fuel, no human heat at all. My breath misted white in the flashlight beam. On the counter lay a ledger book, its cover warped from damp, and beside it a pen with the cap off as if somebody had just set it down. I knew before I touched it whose handwriting would be inside. Russell's block letters filled page after page. Dates scattered over the last few weeks, mile markers, fragments, not a tidy diary, more like a man trying to pin facts to paper before they slid around, and some entries were almost normal. Heard voice of former trainer on northbound, verified dead 4 years. Some were not. Leona says log unconfirmed company language for things they can't afford to name. Then lower on a later page, letters pressed so hard they cut the paper. It only uses the dead first because you will open the door for them faster. I turned another page. Once it gets your voice, do not trust instructions that sound like relief. Another. Saw myself in mirror at 190, not reflection. Lagged half a second. My hands were shaking now, enough to wobble the flashlight beam over the page. The last written line sat alone near the bottom of a mostly blank sheet. It only copies what it needs to replace, no period, no next line, just a long pen streak trailing off the edge, and as if he'd been pulled or startled or simply stopped existing halfway through the thought. Something tapped lightly in the back room. I swung the flashlight. Shelves, mop sink, a stack of oil jugs, nothing moving. Then from somewhere just outside the building I heard my own truck idle. Not mine, mine, and not mine. 2 engine notes almost matched one under the other, close enough that the difference felt like pressure in the teeth. The cold seemed to deepen around me. In that empty office, I finally accepted the shape of what Russell had been trying to say. The thing wasn't just chasing voices or wearing faces, it was selecting. Learning enough to continue. Taking whatever details would let it occupy the route a little more convincingly next time. Collecting, I thought then. I know now that was the wrong word, or at least too small for it. But that was when Loop 2 truly opened for me. Was it hunting drivers or building something out of them, truck by truck, memory by memory, mile by mile? I don't know. I still don't. I heard tires crunch outside. I left the ledger open on the counter and ran for the door. My headlights lit the lot. Beyond them at the road edge, another pair of lights waited. Higher now, nearer. And in front of them, outlined in white, stood Russell Halverson. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking down the road toward the approaching truck that had no business being there, identical to mine right down to the bumper crack and roof lamps and the spray of frozen road grime across the passenger side. I shouted his name. He stepped forward. The truck didn't slow. I remember the next second with obscene clarity, and the crunch of my boots in snow as I ran 2 steps. The cold slicing my throat, the smell of hot brakes blooming hard enough to taste. Russell turning his head just enough for me to see his profile, calm and tired and strangely resolved. Then he walked directly into the path of that truck. There was no impact, no thud, no body thrown. He aligned with it. That's the only word that fits. For one impossible instant, his shape and the truck's grill occupied the same space, as neat as one transparency laid over another, and then he was gone. Not under it, not beyond it. Gone into it the way a reflection disappears when the glass changes angle. The truck passed the lot entrance without slowing. Its driver's side window was dark. I stood there shaking with the flashlight still in my hand, until the taillights vanished into blowing snow. After that, I drove because standing still was no longer a category my mind could use. I don't remember getting back in the cab. I remember the feel of the steering wheel under my gloves and the way the seat seemed colder than before, like somebody else had been sitting in it and left nothing behind but absence. I remember putting the truck in gear and pulling out with the ledger image burned into my head and Russell's last unfinished sentence repeating in time with the wipers. It only copies what it needs to replace. The road north took me as if nothing had happened. That's one of the worst things about the Dalton. It never reflects your state back to you. It doesn't rise to meet your panic. It stays itself. Dark ribbon, wind-cut drifts, marker posts, frost halos around your beams. Yet you can be coming apart at the seams inside the cab, and the road will still ask the same practical things of you. Hold lane, read surface. Don't overcorrect. So I did. For a while, that competence was all that was left of me. The voice didn't come back immediately. Neither did the mirror truck. That silence was worse. It gave thought room. Miles Avery had been my co-driver for almost a year before the whiteout. He was better with people than I was, better at knowing when to talk and when to leave air in the cab. He kept sunflower seeds in the dash and laughed through his nose when he was genuinely amused. He had a bad knee from a loading dock fall in Nebraska long before Alaska, and in hard weather he favored it, just enough that anybody paying attention could see. I was paying attention that night 10 years ago, and that's the fact that never stops mattering. I knew exactly what shape he was in when I left. I hadn't told that part to anyone. Officially, our rig jackknifed in a whiteout south of mile marker 214. Officially, Miles wanted to stay with the truck because he thought rescue would find the unit faster than 2 men on foot. Officially, I walked back for help because visibility was collapsing and one of us needed to move before the road vanished entirely. That was the report. The truth was, we argued. He wanted us to wait together. I looked at his leg, looked at the road, did my own ugly arithmetic, and decided I'd make better time alone. I said I'd send lights back. I said it like I believed it. Then I took the stronger flashlight and went. He called after me once, maybe twice. The wind ate most of it. I reached help, and they found the truck. They never found Miles. I built the rest of my life on the distance between those facts and the report I signed. The radio crackled. Miles said, "You took my gloves by accident." I nearly drove off the shoulder. That was true, not the big truth. A tiny one. In the scramble after the jackknife, I'd shoved both our spare glove sets into my parka by habit, and only realized later I had one of his liners jammed under my sleeve. I never told anyone because it was too small to matter next to the larger sin. The voice knew it. It went on, low and close, like he was sitting in the passenger seat facing forward with the dash light on his hands. "You shut the door twice because it didn't latch the first time. You said you'd send lights, and you didn't look back after the second curve." Every word was a step deeper into something I had locked away precisely because there were no witnesses left to challenge it. "You weren't there," I said, though I didn't know whether I meant the mimic or Miles or myself. "I was," Miles said. Then my own voice from the same speaker, almost overlapping his. "And so were you." At mile marker 211, the headlights appeared again. Closer now, too close to mistake. I could make out the box lines, the roof lamps, the spray pattern of salt. When I checked the mirror, it was my truck. When I looked ahead through the windshield at a gentle bend in the road, I saw another set of headlights oncoming, also my truck. I blinked hard, thinking fatigue, glare, anything. But the oncoming truck didn't pass. It stayed around the bend that should have released it, keeping pace just beyond the point where the road turned. Behind and ahead. The dry cold from the window crack burned so deep in my nose it felt surgical. Then I passed mile marker 214. I know that road. I know where that sign stands, canted a little, base drifted in, reflector chipped on the north face. I passed it and felt my stomach drop with the ugly recognition of exact ground. 3 minutes later, I passed mile marker 214 again. Same lean, same chip, same drift shape. I laughed once then, a sound with no humor in it because the alternative was admitting the road itself had joined in. The voice noticed. "You remember this part." Ahead, the oncoming lights brightened without closing. Behind, in the mirror truck held its place just outside impact distance. My cab felt suddenly too narrow, crowded with memory and imitation and the sharp stink of hot metal. That was when Miles's voice stopped sounding wounded and started sounding almost kind. "You can fix it here." No accusation, no rage. That's what made it persuasive. If he'd hated me, I would have known how to brace. Instead, he sounded like the old Miles, the one who'd stayed awake through my bad stretches and nudged coffee at me and filled silence without demanding anything back. "You stop here," he said, "and we can sort out what happened." My own voice answered from the dash. "It's the fair thing." There are moments when a moral choice doesn't present as good versus evil. It presents as two forms of damage, both plausible, both yours to carry. This was mine. And if I stopped at mile marker 214, maybe I faced whatever had been waiting on that stretch since the whiteout. Maybe I learned whether Miles died because I left him or because something on that road found him first. Maybe I got a chance to put my feet where I'd failed him and finally look directly at the thing I'd spent 10 years narrating around. Or maybe I let it replace me. And if replacement preserved behavior perfectly, if it could wear my truck, my voice, my cadence, my habits, then stopping wasn't sacrifice. It was surrender disguised as atonement. If I kept driving, I might save myself. Or the thing might follow indefinitely, studying, preserving, waiting for a softer mile. Worse than that, I might be carrying it forward toward other drivers, other dispatchers, other lonely cabs and dead voices. On continuing could make me not just a survivor, but a vector. There was no clean answer. I wish there had been. The road narrowed through low berms of wind-packed snow. The duplicate mile marker flashed behind me. Ahead, my oncoming truck finally came into full view, not in the opposite lane, but dead-centered in mine. Impossible and steady, its windshield black. Behind, the mirror truck drew closer until my rear view was mostly grill. Then I saw something in the high beams on the shoulder. A man. Russell. He stood just past the marker, reflective strips faint on his jacket. One hand lifted not in warning but in invitation, like he was ushering somebody toward a door. Maybe he was real. Maybe he was another fit the thing had learned. I don't know. But when he stepped off the shoulder and into the lane ahead of the oncoming truck, I knew what I was about to witness because I'd already seen it once at the fuel stop. He didn't get hit. He aligned. For an instant, the front of the truck wore him like a shadow. Then there was only vehicle, only approach, only my own machine coming at me with all the patience of a road that had had years to practice. "Stop," Miles said. "Stop," my own voice said. The brake pedal waited under my boot. I thought of the whiteout, of Miles with his bad leg braced against the snow-packed step, of how easy it had been to call my choice practical when I was choosing motion over mercy. I thought of the official report, Leona's procedures, Russell's unfinished ledger, every partial truth handed around like it might count as enough. Mostly I thought this: if I let this thing wear me, it wouldn't end with me. It would keep driving, keep calling, and keep finding the dead voices men couldn't resist. Maybe that was already happening. Maybe I was late by years. But stopping to find out felt too much like the original sin in reverse. Another choice wrapped in noble language that still ended with someone else taking my place. So I didn't stop. I downshifted, held lane, and drove straight past mile marker 214 while my own truck came at me head-on. At the last possible second, it folded. Not swerved, folded, like an image bent in the middle. The grille split into light. The light thinned into static, and the entire oncoming shape smeared sideways across the windshield in a white sheet that made the radio scream. Then it was behind me again. Miles laughed softly over the hiss. My own voice laughed with him, almost perfectly in time. I drove, and that's the clean part of the ending if you want one. I did not pull over. I did not step out into the road. I kept the truck straight, kept the load moving, kept my hands where they belonged until the duplicate markers stopped and the road resumed its ordinary ugliness. The headlights followed for a long while, maybe all the way to the north slope. Sometimes they vanished from the mirror for a few minutes, then returned at the same distance. Sometimes the voice used Miles. Sometimes it used me. After a while, I couldn't tell which was worse. Near dawn, the sky went from black to a flat iron gray over the horizon. Snowfields took shape. Pump stations and service cuts began to exist again at the edge of sight. The world looked inhabited. That should have broken the spell. It didn't. At the next dispatch check-in, the radio finally carried a normal signal. Real static, real delay, real human compression in the line. I keyed up before she called me because I needed to hear a living voice use my name. "Northbound unit checking in," I said. My throat felt scraped raw. "Approaching final segment, load secure." A beat of crackle. Then Leona May Kincaid, calm as ever, said, "Copy that, Miles Avery, you're making good time." I don't remember breathing. Maybe I corrected her. I honestly don't know anymore. In my memory, I looked down at my hand on the mic and noticed something small and wrong, my thumb rubbing the edge of the transmit button in a slow back-and-forth motion I had never done in my life. Miles used to do that when he was thinking. Leona asked for my next marker. The radio hissed under her voice, low and patient, like it was waiting to hear who I believed I was. I answered, and whichever name I used, she accepted it.